Hey there, Rockets. It's your sensei here. So last week we had to cut our video short. It was just getting too long. But the first part of our video we spent talking about what it means to break the law. In particular, what makes a law just and what makes a law unjust, or what makes it fair or unfair. So this week we are going to be getting into another complaint that MLK had received from the white preachers that wrote to him. This complaint being, why are you so extreme? Let's remember that we are learning all of this so that we can find out how should we write about history. And we will be touching on what that means during this week. Let's see again what Gamer Sensei has to say about the letter from a Birmingham jail.
Nonviolence is the most potent weapon available to the Negro in his struggle for freedom and justice. I think for the Negro to turn to violence would be both impractical and immoral.
I've been trying not to go off the deep end. Give me a reason. I've been trying not to
stay on point. I've been trying to save my voice, but y'all gave me no choice. The world gone mad, can't ignore this noise. Look at these people found dead in the streets. I got some partners that hate the police. Me, I'm just trying to hold on to my peace, cause I'm liable to lose it and go get the peace.
Can we all get along? Can we get along? Can we stop making it horrible for the older people and the kids?
I've been trying not to go off the deep end. Give me a reason. I've been trying not to.
Okay, so he says, you speak of our activity in Birmingham as extreme. Okay, now we're getting into the extremism. Remember what those white clergymen said, the pastors. They all told him, you're being too extreme. You should stop what you're doing now and start negotiating again. Stop these protests. They're going out of control. And so MLK is now going to talk about extremism. So he says, you talk about it as being extreme. At first, I was rather disappointed that fellow clergymen, because remember, MLK is also a pastor, would see my nonviolent efforts as those of an extremist. I began thinking about the fact that I stand in the middle of two opposing forces in the Negro community. Now get this. Now there's one part of the black community that is a force of complacency, made up in part of Negroes who, as a result of long years of oppression, are so drained of self-respect and a sense of somebodyness that they have adjusted to segregation, and in part of a few middle-class Negroes who, because of a degree of academic and economic security, and because in some ways they profit by segregation, have become insensitive to the problems of the mass. So let's recap that for just a second before I move on. So there's this one group of black people that he says are on one side of the black community. And these are the guys who say, you know what, segregation isn't so bad. I mean, at least we're not slaves. We're just gonna get by. We're not gonna do anything about it because we don't want to anger anybody. We're just gonna keep on keeping on. And he says that even some of them, so the middle class black people, some of them are actually making a profit because of segregation. Because if you think about it, some white people aren't selling to black people, and so these black-owned stores are getting all the black business because they're not allowed to shop in the white stores. So it's almost like they have a monopoly because black people can only shop in their store. So they're actually making a profit because of segregation. So that's a weird thing that happened where sometimes black people actually got benefited from segregation, but not in a good way. This was a kind of a mean way of extorting their own people because of segregation. It wasn't a good look, is what I'm saying. And then there's the next group of people. Now these people, these are more like Malcolm X. We'll talk about him later, but let's look at these people. The other force is one of bitterness and hatred, and it comes perilously close to advocating violence. It is expressed in various black nationalist groups that are springing up across the nation, the largest and best known being Elijah Muhammad's Muslim movement. Nourished by the Negro's frustration over the continued existence of racial discrimination, this movement is made up of people who have lost faith in America, who have absolutely rejected Christianity, and who have concluded that the white man is an incurable devil. Now he brings up a name here, Elijah Muhammad. Elijah Muhammad was a guy who basically ran a group similar to what MLK did, only obviously he was Muslim, not Christian, and he was much more about violence, that sometimes it's okay to be violent. This, by the way, is the group that Malcolm X started in. He didn't stay there because he realized that they had a bunch of things that he didn't agree with. But these are the people that are bitter. If I could describe them, I would say that they are similar to the dark side of the Force. These are the guys who are angry. They are letting their frustration turn into something that is not productive. In fact, MLK says that these guys are pretty much stopping people from getting their rights because they're so violent, nobody wants to give in to them. You know, it's making the other side be even more violent.
Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.
You know how people talk about how revenge is a cycle? So MLK is really worried about these guys because he doesn't want there to be a cycle of revenge. He wants all of the hate and all of the bad things to only happen to one side so that when they can come back together again and stop being racist, they will be able to be friends and not have to worry about, you know, people coming at them for revenge or something. Okay, so those are the two groups of people. Let's move on to what MLK's part is in this. Where does he fall on this spectrum? Is he in this camp of the do-nothings, or is he in this camp of the violent people? Well, I mean, we know he's not violent, but let's see what he really is. Let's check. He says, I have tried to stand between these two forces, saying that we need to emulate neither the do-nothingism of the complacent nor the hatred and despair of the black nationalist. For there is the more excellent way of love and nonviolent protest. I am grateful to God that, through the influence of the Negro Church, the way of nonviolence became an integral part of our struggle. If this philosophy has not emerged by now, many streets of the South would, I am convinced, be flowing with blood. And I am further convinced that if our white brothers dismiss as rabble-rousers and outside agitators those of us who employ nonviolent direct action, and if they refuse to support our nonviolent efforts, millions of Negroes will, out of frustration and despair, seek solace and security in black nationalist ideology, a development that would inevitably lead to a frightening racial nightmare. So MLK is apparently in between these two groups. When I think of HIT, I think of, again, Undertale. We've got the black nationalists, which would be representative of Undyne, who says, we've suffered enough, it's time to fight. And he's not really in the do-nothing-ism people, the people who just kind of say, things are the way they are, so we might as well make the most of it. No, he's in between both of them, saying, hold on, I think we can fix this, but let's try not to use violence, because I think it's possible to use nonviolent protest. So he's in between the two forces of the black community. Alright, so let's go back. So he says, this last part here that I just want to really highlight. He says if these white people continue to call the protesters rabble-rousers, or that they're being extreme, they are going to fall into the category of violent. So he says, if you guys start yelling at us, we are going to end up falling into this category. We're not going to go back to being do-nothings. We are going to become super violent and angry at you. Now, MLK is not talking about himself. He's talking about the community. So what MLK is saying is that they are trying to fix things, but they are doing it non-violently. If white people keep telling them, you're making a mess, cut it out, you're being too extreme, they are going to start getting frustrated. And when they get frustrated, it's time to start using violence, all right? Just like how a gamer rages, the protesters will similarly rage if they cannot get what they need just by doing non-violent protesting. Because let's remember, when we protest, it's not just for kicks and giggles, it's because we want something accomplished. We want to be able to talk to them about a problem that they refuse to talk to us about. Or, there's no time to talk. We just need to let them know immediately. This is how we feel. Can we talk about it? This, again, is the white moderates who are just ruining everything because they are so opposed to any kind of change that would make them have to do something that they would rather just complain about people who are trying to get things to change. MLK says that they are actually worse than the KKK, the Nazis, the people who sit there and do absolutely nothing. So that's encouraging. Let's move on. And now this approach is being termed extremist. So he's saying again, his methods of being nonviolent and protesting non-violently is being dubbed extremist. And he's saying, I don't understand it, but you know what? I will accept that term. And look what he says. But though I was initially disappointed at being categorized as an extremist, as I continued to think about the matter, I gradually gained a measure of satisfaction from the label. Was not Jesus an extremist for love? And he mentions a bunch of other guys, but I'm cutting it out. And Thomas Jefferson said, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. So the question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists we will be. Will we be extremists for hate or for love? Will we be extremists for the preservation of injustice or the extension of justice? In that dramatic scene on Calvary's Hill, 3 men were crucified. We must never forget that all 3 were crucified for the exact same crime, the crime of extremism. 2 were extremists for immorality and thus fell below their environment. The other, Jesus Christ, was an extremist for love, truth, and goodness, and thereby rose above his environment. Perhaps the South, the nation, and the world are in dire need of creative extremists. So that's a bold claim. He says, you know what? If you're going to call me an extremist, fine, I will take that name. But I want you to know that there's some other people that you would definitely think are extreme if I'm also extreme. He labels a bunch of guys, one of which is his homeboy, Jesus Christ. He says that Jesus was an extremist for love. And let's talk about that for a second, because in his letter, he uses this quote from Jesus. So this was a saying that Jesus said. It was, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. So MLK says, well, Jesus said this, and that does sound pretty extreme. I gotta tell you guys, loving my enemies, I don't think I would do that. I think there is a good reason for why I bought this bat. It wasn't to love them, So anyways, that's MLK on Jesus. He says, you're gonna call me extreme. I guess I'm just like Jesus then, huh? He was pretty extreme, saying to love your enemies. And yeah, that's pretty extreme. I don't think anybody would really, want to agree with that. Even if you were a Christian, I don't think a lot of people who are Christians say to themselves, oh yeah, it's easy to love my enemy and it's something that I naturally want to do. No, No, I don't think anybody wants to do that for real. But it is something that Jesus did actually say, at least, if we can believe what the Bible says. So anyways, that's what MLK has to say about extremism. He says, fine, call me an extremist, but I'm just being like Jesus when I am. So let's break this down. An extremist for love. What a swell guy. Here's what he told us today. Number 1, only break rules that are unjust and accept the punishment for breaking them. And by the way, he also brings up that that's exactly what Jesus did. Jesus did nothing but go around loving people, and he got killed for it. So, go figure. MLK says that we need to do the exact same thing, but for protesting. You can march in the middle of the street, but then you also have to go to jail if they arrest you for it. So the next thing he says is 2 things, actually. So he talks to the people who are oppressed, which in this case are the black community. Let's remember, this could be applied to any community that is being oppressed. So for the oppressed, he says, don't give in to hate and violence, but also don't do nothing. He wants to get the extremists who are using violence on this side and the people who are doing nothing on this side, and he wants them to come together and figure out how to protest non-violently and in a way that is going to get people to want to listen to them. So in other words, don't fall on one end or the other. There has to be this little happy place, sweet spot where you protest, but you're also not violent, and it brings the most amount of people on your side, because if you're not beating them up, they're more likely to join you. As for the people in power, he says kind of the same thing. Don't be hateful and don't do nothing. So obviously, MLK does not like Nazis. He does not like the KKK. But he also absolutely hates the white moderates, the people who just say, oh, now is not the right time, stop protesting, it's not a good look for you. He's saying these people need to cut it out. They should join in the protests and actually show that they care, not just say that they care. And the people who are hateful, obviously he wants them to change their mind, but there isn't too much in there, because he's not talking to people who hate him, he's talking to people who say that they love him, and actually they're just messing everything up for him. He does want people to stop being hateful, but he also is more talking about people who do nothing. And this actually reminds me of a quote from JFK. JFK said this: the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Now, the person who started this thing, I don't know who originally said it, but I know that he said it, so I'm going to give him props for it. For good people to do nothing. That is a disturbing reality. There are terrible things going on in the world. We expect there to be a level of terribleness in the world. However, we would also expect somebody to want to stand up and do something about it. That's not always what happens. In fact, that's a lot of the reason for why Germany fell to the Nazis. They did nothing to stop the Nazis when they started being mean to Jewish people, when they started making them have to wear stars on their chest, when they started making them have to live in certain parts of the community that were worse than where they were, when they started Kristallnacht, which is where they had their thugs go in and just start tearing apart Jewish-owned places, whether it was their synagogues, which was like a church or a mosque, or their stores or their homes. So this happened because good people did nothing. They didn't stop it. They didn't say anything about it. They just let it happen. And eventually these Jewish people got sent to death camps and killed purely because they were Jewish. Why am I bringing up the Jews in this? Because they do have some parallels to the black community and their struggle, right? But it also happened so suddenly, just immediately over the span of 10 years. Jewish people went from being respected to being hated and being killed. And that's a scary thing that could potentially happen another time in this century or just any time in human history. Because that's not the only time that it has happened. It's just, the most popular one to talk about. It's certainly the one that you see the most video games taking place in, which is why I know so much about it. So this happens in Jewish communities too. And for any white people watching this, first of all, it is necessary for us to talk about it as a collective, because as white people, because I'm pretty sure you guys figured out I'm kind of white. Actually, no, what am I saying? I am very white. I am a very white person. It is our responsibility to not sit there and do nothing. You guys are probably familiar with some of the protest signs that say silence is violence. They're not saying that because they just want people to feel bad about themselves. They are saying that because if white people who say that they are not racist and say that they want black people to have rights and not get killed in the streets, then they need to do something about it, right? Because as it is, white people still have a lot more power in government and in society than other minorities. And because of that, we should be using our power to uplift the people who are being oppressed. Don't just sit there and wait for it to figure itself out. Actually get up and do something about it, right? Otherwise, you're letting evil triumph, and you don't want that, because you thought they were just gonna come for them, but if they can get them, they start coming after other people too. The Nazis didn't just go after the Jews, they went after everybody they hated until there wasn't anybody left but people who looked just like the Nazis and thought just like the Nazis, except of course for the people who were quiet and did nothing. You don't want that to happen to your society, because I am positive that all of us fall into at least one category that the white supremacy hates. I'm a woman. I definitely fall into a category that will be tormented by these people if they get a foothold. So the idea is that if we form a collective, if we make sure that everybody is treated fairly, then we won't have to worry about us not being treated fairly. Does that make sense? Protect everybody, and then you won't have to worry about where your protection is. Anyways, I think that's enough for today. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. Goodbye.
I've been trying not to.
Hey there, Rockets. It's your sensei again. So it seems like we had a lot to learn today. Some of it a little scary. I think the key takeaways from this video are going to be that everybody has a part to play in ending racism and making sure everybody is treated fairly. And if that ends up being viewed as extremist, as MLK would say, we're just gonna have to do it anyways. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in class. Goodbye.
Don't push me, cause I'm close to the edge. I'm trying not to lose my head.